The T-28 Trojan stands as a silent witness to one of America's most consequential strategic failures. Despite its robust construction and adaptability, the Trojan became emblematic of Defense Secretary Robert McNamara's fundamentally flawed approach to warfare in Indochina. That serious mistake caused the balance of victory to gradually tilt toward North Vietnam. On the morning of January 2, 1963, the air over the Mekong Delta was thick with humidity and American overconfidence. For the advisors of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, the war was a problem that could be solved with technology. They had a new, seemingly invincible doctrine, air mobility. And they had the tools to execute it: fleets of CH-21 Shawnee transport helicopters, new UH-1 Huey gunships, and the undisputed king of ground attack in country, the North American T-28 Trojan. The plan for the day was a textbook example of this new way of war, a classic hammer and anvil operation. Intelligence had pinpointed a Viet Cong radio transmitter near the hamlet of Ap Bac, protected by what was believed to be a single company of around 120 guerrillas from the VC 261st Battalion. The plan was simple, elegant, and lethal. The Anvil II battalions of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam Infantry would push from the south, sealing any escape route. The Hammer 10, lumbering CH-21 Shawnee helicopters would ferry an entire Army of the Republic of Vietnam battalion to the north of the hamlet, slamming the trap shut. Armored M113 personnel carriers would provide the muscle on the ground, and providing the top cover, the airborne cavalry ready to obliterate anything that moved, was a flight of T-28D Trojans on standby at Bien Hoa Air Base. These weren't just trainers anymore. They were converted killers. The heart of the T-28D was its 1,425 horsepower Reitmar 1820 Cyclone 9-cylinder radial engine, giving it the deep, guttural roar that had already become a sound of impending doom for Viet Cong forces. Its wings were reinforced now, sporting 6 hardpoints capable of carrying a deadly mix of 250-pound MiG-181 general-purpose bombs, pods of 2.75-inch folding-fin aerial rockets, and napalm. And mounted in pods under the wings were 2 M3 50-caliber machine guns, each capable of spitting out 1,200 rounds per minute. The T-28 was the perfect tool for this kind of war. Or so they thought. The operation began at dawn. On the ground, however, the Viet Cong weren't just a single company. They were a hardened, disciplined battalion, and they knew the Americans' playbook. They had dug in along a 400-meter-long irrigation canal, using the high banks and thick foliage as perfect concealment. They had one simple, brutal order: hold your fire. Let the helicopters get deep inside the kill zone. Around 7:30 a.m., the hammer fell. As the second wave of CH-21s packed with Army of the Republic of Vietnam soldiers descended into their landing zone, the world erupted. From 100 hidden positions, a curtain of small arms and machine gun fire ripped through the air. The Shawnees, with their thin aluminum skin, were hopelessly vulnerable. One was stitched from nose to tail and immediately slammed into the muddy paddy field. 4 more were crippled, forcing them to limp away or crash land. The Army of the Republic of Vietnam troops who made it out found themselves pinned down in the open with no cover and nowhere to run. The frantic call went out. Lancer Flight troops in contact, requesting immediate air support. Minutes later, the distinctive roar of the Trojans filled the sky. Leading the flight, the pilot banked his T-28 sharply, the bubble canopy giving him a panoramic, godlike view of the chaos below. He could see the downed helicopters, the muzzle flashes from the tree line, and the pinned-down Army of the Republic of Vietnam troops. His job was simple: find the enemy and destroy them. He nosed the Trojan over into a classic 30-degree dive. The wind screamed past the canopy as the ground rushed up to meet him. Peering through his simple optical gun sight, he centered the crosshairs on the suspected enemy tree line and squeezed the trigger on his control stick. The entire airframe shuddered as the twin 50 cals unleashed hell. A stream of tracers every 5th round in the belt guided his aim as he walked the fire along the canal bank, chewing up dirt, trees, and anything in his path. Pulling out of the dive, he circled for another pass, this time with rockets. He selected a pair of folding fin aerial rockets. These weren't precision weapons. They were for area suppression. Another dive, a little shallower this time. At the right altitude, he pressed the launch button. With a whoosh, 2 rockets streaked from their pods, exploding in flashes of fire and shrapnel in the tree line. The ground shook. But here the T-28's first critical limitation was exposed. Its devastating firepower was only effective if it could see the target. The VCs were so well dug in and camouflaged that the pilots were essentially guessing firing at a green line of trees. The bombs and rockets created spectacular explosions. But they were often just churning mud and shredding leaves yards away from the enemy's actual positions. The VC fighters tucked deep into their foxholes would duck during the strafing run and pop back up the moment the plane passed. Worse, the danger. Close situation was a nightmare. With Army of the Republic of Vietnam, troops pinned down just 100 to 200 meters from the VC line, dropping a 250-pound bomb was out of the question. The risk of hitting friendly forces of fragging was too high. The T-28s were reduced to making repeated, frustratingly inaccurate strafing runs with their machine guns. They were a powerful hammer swinging wildly in the dark. Watching this unfold from his L-19 Bird Dog command plane, United States Advisor Lieutenant Colonel John Paul Vann was screaming into his radio. The air support wasn't working. The ground troops weren't moving. The M113 armored carriers, which should have been able to roll right over the VC positions, were stalled, their commanders afraid of the enemy's anti-armor weapons. The entire perfect plan had ground to a halt. For hours, the T-28s circled overhead, a symbol of immense, untouchable power being rendered utterly impotent. They could burn fuel, they could make noise, and they could chew up the landscape. But they couldn't break the stalemate. In a final desperate move, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam Command decided to drop a battalion of elite paratroopers to the east of Ap Bac to finally seal the non-existent trap. It was the day's ultimate blunder. Due to catastrophic miscommunication, the C-47 transport planes dropped the paratroopers not to the east, but directly to the west, right on top of the Viet Cong's strongest, most prepared defensive positions. Once again, the T-28s roared into action, trying to provide cover for the descending paratroopers, who were now exposed targets in the open sky. They laid down a wall of suppressive fire, but it was too little too late. The paratroopers landed in a meat grinder and were immediately pinned down, suffering horrific casualties. As dusk fell, the battle sputtered to a close. Under the cover of darkness, the victorious VC 261st Battalion collected weapons, tended to their wounded, and simply melted away into the jungle, leaving behind a shattered Army of the Republic of Vietnam force and the wreckage of American technology. The final tally was a catastrophe. The United States and the Army of the Republic of Vietnam had lost 83 soldiers and 3 American advisors. 5 helicopters were destroyed. The Viet Cong, who had faced a force more than 10 times their size, suffered only 18 dead. Ap Bac was a brutal lesson. It proved that superior firepower and advanced technology were useless without courage, competent leadership, and sound tactics on the ground. For the T-28 Trojan, the verdict was clear. The plane itself had performed its technical mission flawlessly. The engines roared to life, the guns fired, the bombs dropped. But it was the wrong tool for this specific job. Its power was indiscriminate, ill-suited for a close-quarters fight against a phantom enemy. It couldn't see through the jungle canopy. It couldn't distinguish friend from foe in the chaotic scrum. And most importantly, it couldn't instill the will to fight in the soldiers it was supposed to be supporting. The perfect weapon for a simple war had just met the complex, brutal reality of Vietnam. And on that day, at Ap Bac, it had failed. It was a failure that foreshadowed the fate of the T-28, and in many ways, the fate of the entire American enterprise in Southeast Asia. But was the T-28 too weak? Or was the strategy that the United States leaders at that time put forth a short-sighted and arrogant strategy? In the early 1960s, the United States entered one of the most tense periods of the Cold War. Newly elected President John Kennedy affirmed that America would continue its implacable opposition to communism and the Soviet bloc. To achieve his arms race objectives, President Kennedy needed an elite figure to take the helm as Secretary of Defense. The man he had his eye on was a prominent name in the American financial world, at the time the new president of the Ford Motor Company, Robert McNamara. Brilliant, strategic, and calculating. These were the words used to describe him. Until then, he was the only person outside of the Ford family to have ever become president of the corporation. An intelligent and professional man. In a concise CIA profile, the new Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, was described simply as a professional manager entering the military game. Indeed, Robert McNamara approached the role of Secretary of Defense with the perspective of a talented economist. To him, running the military was like a business problem revolving solely around costs and benefits. McNamara immediately initiated a comprehensive overhaul of the United States military, which included modernizing all branches of the armed forces to a state-of-the-art level, expanding the military's size, while simultaneously making deep cuts to anything obsolete or inefficient. Later, when speaking of the United States military's rapid transformation under McNamara, historians would call it a revolution. Within a year, the United States had doubled the production rate of nuclear submarines and doubled the production of intercontinental ballistic missiles. They increased air combat power by 100%. They streamlined the military command structure to increase rapid response capabilities. Robert McNamara placed immense value on numbers and data, and told his subordinates many times that data alone was sufficient to build the necessary military strategy in Vietnam. At that time, Vietnam was a crucial link in America's global strategy. The United States saw South Vietnam as a bulwark against the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, and policymakers widely believed in the so-called domino theory. If Vietnam fell, other larger Asian nations with more direct interests in the United States' security would also fall in succession. But theory and reality do not always align. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara's approach to the Vietnam conflict embodied his background as a data-driven business executive. His strategy relied heavily on quantifiable metrics and technological solutions rather than the realities of unconventional warfare, a context in which aircraft like the T-28 Trojan operated with mixed results. McNamara's air war strategy centered on three primary objectives: interdicting North Vietnamese supply routes, providing close air support for ground troops, and demonstrating American resolve through graduated bombing campaigns. Fundamentally, he believed the conflict could be managed like a corporate problem with sufficient data collection, statistical analysis, and technological application. The T-28 Trojan found itself caught between these strategic aims. Originally pressed into service as an expedient solution for counterinsurgency operations, these aircraft became tools in McNamara's metrics-driven approach to warfare. Success was measured in sortie rates, bomb tonnage dropped, and target destruction, often without accounting for the strategic effectiveness of these missions. Perhaps no project better illustrated McNamara's technocratic approach than the McNamara Line, an ambitious attempt to create an electronic barrier across Vietnam to detect and interdict infiltration. This electronic fence would utilize sensors, mines, and aerial surveillance to create a virtual barrier against enemy movement. The plan reflected McNamara's unwavering faith in American technological superiority. Indeed, even lightweight aircraft, like the T-28 Trojan, became part of this technological approach, modified with additional sensors and communication equipment to support the broader intelligence network. In practice, McNamara's theoretical models collided harshly with battlefield realities. The Defense Secretary's reliance on statistical measures, body count sortie rates, and bomb tonnage created perverse incentives throughout the command structure. Field commanders reported what Pentagon officials wanted to hear, not what was happening. For T-28 Trojan pilots and maintenance crews, this disconnect meant operating under unrealistic expectations with inadequate resources. The aircraft itself became emblematic of the gap between Washington's theoretical understanding and the practical challenges of counterinsurgency warfare in Southeast Asia. Despite its adaptability and relative success in specific roles, the T-28 Trojan ultimately proved inadequate for the broader demands of the Vietnam conflict. As the war intensified, the aircraft's inherent limitations became increasingly apparent, undermining McNamara's technological approach to counterinsurgency. The T-28 Trojan's payload capacity, even in its combat-configured variants, remained significantly constrained. Combat-configured T-28s could carry up to 1,800 pounds of bombs or rockets, far less than purpose-built attack aircraft of the era. The D variant featured 6 underwing hardpoints with a total capacity of 1,200 pounds for bombs, rockets, and machine gun pods. This restricted ordnance load meant T-28 pilots often couldn't deliver sufficient firepower against hardened targets or sustain extended operations without frequent rearming. Moreover, the aircraft's range proved problematic for operations across Southeast Asia's vast terrain. With a maximum range of approximately 1,060 miles, the T-28's operational radius remained limited, particularly when carrying full combat loads. This constraint forced planners to position aircraft closer to combat zones, increasing vulnerability to ground attacks on forward air bases. As North Vietnamese air defenses grew more sophisticated, the T-28's vulnerability became increasingly evident. Unlike purpose-built attack aircraft with redundant systems and extensive armor protection, the converted trainer offered minimal protection against ground fire. Consequently, missions had to be restricted primarily to areas with limited anti-aircraft threats. In essence, the T-28 excelled only in permissive environments against opponents lacking sophisticated air defenses, precisely the opposite of the evolving battlefield conditions in Vietnam. As the conflict progressed, North Vietnamese forces deployed increasingly effective anti-aircraft artillery and eventually surface-to-air missiles, rendering slow-moving aircraft like the T-28 particularly vulnerable. Beyond combat limitations, the T-28 fleet faced significant maintenance challenges in Southeast Asia's harsh operating environment. High-humidity monsoon conditions and austere field facilities accelerated wear on airframes originally designed for the controlled environment of training bases. Maintenance requirements increased dramatically as airframes accumulated combat hours far beyond their intended design parameters. Fundamentally, the T-28's shortcomings exemplified the broader failure of attempting to adapt existing platforms for missions they weren't designed to perform, a recurring theme in McNamara's technological approach to an unconventional conflict. United States Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara was one of Washington, D.C.'s foremost minds. McNamara had an unshakable faith in scientific evidence, and to that end, he established an elite group known as JASON. It was composed of 47 distinguished scientists working with 20 experts from the Institute for Defense Analyses. Many of them had already made their names on landmark programs like the Manhattan Project, which created the atomic bomb, as well as other secret weapons projects, and even plans for the annihilation of the Soviet Union. But in the end, not even this elite group could help him achieve victory in Indochina. Robert McNamara held the post of Secretary of Defense for 8 years, faithfully serving both President Kennedy and President Johnson. From that position, he would make decisions that changed him, the nation, and the world forever. His tenure lasted 8 years, from 1961 until 1968, when he either resigned or was fired by President Johnson. Then, in May of 1995, 20 years after the war in Vietnam had ended, he said that they had made a terrible mistake and that they owed it to future generations to explain why. So perhaps his time in Indochina was the saddest chapter of his life. Of course, the T-29 Trojan is not just a symbol of the American leadership's misguided strategy at the time. Its life has other stories. And now, we will talk about it, starting with its birth. In 1948, North American aviation's new aircraft won the competition to become the next-generation pilot training aircraft for the United States military. First flown on September 26, 1949, The T-28 Trojan marked a significant milestone as the first all-new post-World War II trainer and the first United States military trainer outfitted with tricycle landing gear. North American designed the T-28 specifically to replace the aging T-6 Texan trainer that had served throughout World War II. The prototype XT-28 company designation, NA-159, completed its maiden flight in September 1949, subsequently arriving at Eglin Air Force Base in mid-1950 for suitability tests as an advanced trainer. The Air Force evaluation focused on the aircraft's transition instrument and gunnery capabilities before issuing a production contract. Production began in 1950 and continued until 1957, with North American manufacturing a total of 1,948 T-28 aircraft across various models. The original United States Air Force T-28A featured an 800 horsepower Wright R1300 engine providing a maximum speed of nearly 300 miles per hour and a service ceiling of 24,200 feet. Furthermore, the T-28A had a wingspan of 40 feet 1 inch, an overall length of 32 feet, and a cruising speed of 191 miles per hour. Although originally intended for both basic and advanced training, the Air Force quickly discovered that the speed and power of the T-28 proved too challenging for new cadets. Consequently, the military modified its training program, continuing to use the smaller-engined T-6 Texan for basic instruction through the Korean War while employing the T-28 for more advanced stages. Unlike the Air Force version, the Navy variants T-28B and T-28C featured significantly more powerful 1,425 horsepower engines. The Navy produced 489 T-28B models and 299 T-28C aircraft, with the latter specifically equipped with arresting gear for carrier training. Students found the T-28 sturdy and roomy, with excellent visibility, while its flight characteristics were both responsive and docile. Notably, it could be safely spun from relatively low altitudes with near instantaneous recovery, making it ideal for training scenarios. By the early 1960s, military planners recognized the T-28's potential beyond training. The Air Force began a program in 1962 to modify more than 200 T-28As into T-28D Nomad tactical fighter bombers, specifically for counter-insurgency warfare in Southeast Asia. These modifications included upgrading to the more powerful 1,425 horsepower engine and adding 6 underwing hardpoints for weapons. Air Commando T-28 usage began with the reactivation of the force in 1961, when 8 aircraft were assigned to Hurlburt Field modified to carry 50 caliber machine guns, 2.75-inch rockets, and a small quantity of bombs. In November 1961, T-28s deployed with the Farmgate Detachment to South Vietnam, both to train South Vietnamese pilots and for direct combat operations. During a typical week of Farmgate activity in March 1963, the TD-28s flew 90 sorties and expended ordnance on 58 of them. Throughout the Vietnam conflict, these aircraft operated extensively with both American and Southeast Asian forces. The T-28 has the sobering distinction of being the first United States fixed-wing attack aircraft lost in South Vietnam during the war. Behind the official combat deployments of the T-28 Trojan lay a shadowy world of covert operations that remained classified for decades. While officially designated as a trainer and later as a counter-insurgency aircraft, the T-28's versatility made it ideal for secret missions across Southeast Asia. The covert war in Laos became the T-28 Trojan's most significant battlefield. As part of Operation White Star in 1961, these aircraft were painted in Royal Laotian Air Force markings and initially flown by Thai pilots trained by the United States Air Force. This operation marked the beginning of what would later evolve into the Steve Canyon program, the code name for covert Air Force operations supporting indigenous forces in Laos. By 1964, the program expanded significantly under the operational control of the United States Ambassador to Laos, with Air Force personnel serving as forward air controllers known as Ravens. These pilots coordinated strikes against North Vietnamese forces moving along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ravens worked closely with T-28 pilots directing airstrikes while flying unmarked aircraft in civilian clothes. Their missions remained officially unacknowledged due to the Geneva Accords that prohibited foreign military presence in Laos. The effectiveness of the T-28 in these missions was remarkable, given the aircraft's original purpose. Its 6 underwing hardpoints could carry a combination of bombs, rockets, and gun pods, making it surprisingly capable for guerrilla warfare conditions. Moreover, its relatively simple maintenance requirements allowed operations from primitive airfields with minimal support infrastructure. The Central Intelligence Agency played a pivotal role in T-28 operations throughout Indochina. Working alongside Air America, the CIA's proprietary airline, these agencies established a network of secret bases from which T-28 aircraft conducted missions that officially didn't exist. Air America crews maintained, supported, and sometimes piloted these aircraft. Their operations included delivering supplies to isolated CIA outposts, transporting indigenous troops and refugees, conducting reconnaissance missions over denied territory, supporting ground operations with direct air support. The relationship between Air America and the T-28 program exemplified how conventional military assets could be repurposed for unconventional warfare. In many cases, Air America pilots would ferry T-28s between bases, conduct training for indigenous pilots, and even fly combat missions when necessary. Among the most fascinating aspects of the T-28's covert history was its use by Hmong and Thai pilots. Under the leadership of General Vang Pao, the CIA recruited Hmong tribesmen to fight against the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese forces. The Air Force established a clandestine training program at Udorn Royal Thai Air Force Base, where selected Hmong recruits learned to fly the T-28. These pilots faced extraordinary challenges. Many had minimal formal education, no previous flight experience, and limited English proficiency. Yet through intensive training, dozens became combat-ready T-28 pilots who fought with remarkable skill and courage. Their cultural knowledge and motivation to defend their homeland made them exceptionally effective. Thai pilots also played a crucial role in the secret war. Under bilateral agreements with the United States, Thai personnel flew T-28s in Laos while officially remaining part of Thailand's military. This arrangement provided plausible deniability for American involvement while expanding the pool of available pilots. The Hmong and Thai T-28 squadrons ultimately conducted thousands of sorties against North Vietnamese forces. When Communist forces finally captured Long Ting in 1975, the main Hmong stronghold in Laos, several Hmong pilots escaped by flying their T-28s to Thailand, bringing an end to one of the most remarkable chapters in the aircraft's history. Beyond its operational history in Southeast Asia, the T-28 Trojan left an indelible mark on military aviation that continues to resonate today. Even as the aircraft itself proved insufficient for the broader demands of Vietnam, its legacy shaped both aircraft design and military thinking for decades thereafter. The T-28 Trojans' experience directly influenced subsequent counterinsurgency aircraft development. Many of the lessons learned from its deployment informed the requirements for the A-37 Dragonfly and OV-10 Bronco purpose-built counterinsurgency aircraft that addressed the Trojans' shortcomings. These successors featured increased payload capacity, improved survivability, and enhanced loiter capabilities. Furthermore, the concept of the light attack aircraft that emerged in the early 2000s owes much to the T-28's pioneering role. Contemporary platforms, like the A-29 Super Tucano and AT-6 Wolverine, reflect evolutionary improvements on the fundamental concept the T-28 helped establish affordable, maintainable aircraft suited for irregular warfare environments. At first glance, the T-28 story might seem merely historical. Nonetheless, its deployment offers enduring lessons about matching technology to strategic objectives. The aircraft's limitations underscored that no technological solution, regardless of modifications, can compensate for a flawed strategy. Given these points, military planners now recognize that counterinsurgency operations require appropriately scaled capabilities rather than technological overkill. The Trojans' experience demonstrated that combat aircraft must balance affordability, maintainability, and effectiveness principles that remain relevant in today's counterinsurgency operations. Throughout the United States, aviation enthusiasts have preserved the T-28's legacy through meticulous restoration efforts. Presently, dozens of airworthy T-28s remain in civilian hands, frequently appearing at air shows, where their distinctive sound and profile continue to captivate audiences. Aviation museums across America maintain static displays of T-28 variants, typically accompanied by exhibits detailing their unusual journey from trainer to combat aircraft. These preservation efforts ensure that forthcoming generations can appreciate not just the aircraft's technical characteristics, but its complex historical significance in America's most controversial conflict. The T-28 Trojan, though designed as a trainer, became a symbol of America's ambitions and missteps in the Vietnam War. The Battle of Ap Bac in 1963 and covert operations in Laos laid bare its limitations in an unconventional war, where superior technology could not compensate for flawed tactics and leadership. Under Robert McNamara's data-driven approach, the belief in technological supremacy thrust the T-28 into roles it was never meant to fulfill, leading to bitter failures. Yet the T-28 story is not solely one of defeat. Its versatility in covert missions, the courage of Hmong and Thai pilots, and the lessons learned shaped future generations of attack aircraft. Today, as surviving T-28s grace air shows, they stand not just as historical relics, but as a poignant reminder: no matter how advanced technology is only as effective as the strategy behind it. From the muddy paddies of Ap Bac to the secret battlefields of Laos, the T-28 Trojan tells a story of a turbulent era where human ambition met the harsh realities of war.